Welcome everybody to the Leaders in Hunting County call for May 7th of our weekly expedition here on working on really trying to dive deep into the issues that have been raised on the COVID-19 crisis and also really amplify our work. Really appreciate the deep support everybody's been showing. We have really strong turnouts and appreciate that you have busy schedules. So we're going to dive right in and be prepared. This may go 2 hours. We have a lot to present and we want to give it the time and leave some room for you in terms of your questions. So we're going to do our legislative updates. I'm going to add a couple extra updates I didn't put on the agenda, and then we'll talk about Savvy really quickly. We posted on that earlier. That's the very useful online app or tool that can be used to figure out people's what people need and should do on their student loans, especially valuable right now with a COVID-19 crisis. The bulk of the call will be on the rental counseling, and we have Kim Johnson from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Kim's been on the terrific insights, and the idea will be here on a national perspective on the rental marketplace, where it stands, but also how it's being impacted by current legislation that's passed, but also what's coming. David Young will be talking about the fundamentals of rental counseling, and David Joki will be talking about the fundamentals of rental counseling, two different perspectives and leading voices in our work. And then we'll have three organizations that are doing it and have been doing it for a while, and that'll be Todd Capito from Tabor Community Services, Karen Hauseneck-Yetman from Belmont Housing Resources, Russell Graves from the National Foundation for Debt Management. And they are doing programs that have been in place and have figured out ways to how to pay the bills on it, but also deliver services of value to people. So some examples of what works in the field practically. We'll also talk some about we'll do a quick thing on NHRC memberships, and then I think we'll have next week's call will be about advocacy and actually more localized state network advocacy. We're going to have several of the leading advocacy networks to talk about how they've been able to be effective in their legislatures and other fields. This is particularly important because some funds will be flowing locally, and how to engage and make the most of that. And more importantly, some of the state programs will be able to be impacting our work. And so we thought this would be really timely, especially with what's going on right now. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll have Ellie hopefully give a quick update on what to expect at the end of the call. But I think let's start out with the legislative update. We have some very big, not final, but in progress news. So Melody, tell us what's happening.
Thank you. So hello everyone, just to give a bit of context, everyone understands there's been considered talk on Capitol Hill about a new potential stimulus package. Everyone's calling it Stimulus 4.0. I just saw on thehill.com today that both Speaker Pelosi and minority leader, Schumer, have said they were planning to introduce that package soon. And we are very, very happy to let partners on the phone and members here that we've been working very closely with Representative Axne, a Democrat from Iowa, on legislation that will ask for $700 million for the Housing Counseling Assistance Program during the COVID-19 pandemic. She's previously introduced legislation in March asking for the same figure, and she's been a very vocal and supportive advocate for housing counseling in the House for us. Bruce and I reached out to her office and sort of worked really closely with her, as well as the House Financial Services Committee, on very specifically the language, the mechanisms, in which that the services should be distributed, as well as eligible use. So as you can see on the screen, the design of this individual program will be that it will be distributed similar to the NeighborWorks implemented program, the National Foreclosure Mitigation Counseling Program, which came out of the Great Recession, because there were some concerns that HUD would be, there would be challenges, if you will, with HUD getting the funds out of the door as quickly as the current pandemic will require. Eligible uses, as you can see, will include public education and outreach, direct services, as well as technology and equipment, which is feedback we heard from several housing counseling agencies. They wanted to use the funds to allow themselves to do mobile counseling, as well as work from home and allow for upgrades, as well as training. And one piece of the legislation that was very, very important to our partners on the Hill was that no less than 40% of funds should be given to agencies serving low-income, homeless, and minority populations. They are very clear on when they say these populations. They specifically mean potentially those who are experiencing homelessness, at risk for homelessness, renters, as well as homeowners. So we're really excited about the legislation. It has not been introduced yet, but we anticipate that it'll be introduced soon. Ellie, next slide. Thank you. So as I said, we worked really closely with both Representative Axney as well as House Financial Services Committee staff. They've been very great, very responsive. I think we were sending them emails as early as several weeks ago, and as recent, if you can believe it's about an hour ago. Chairwoman Waters has said that housing counseling is one of her utmost priorities during the pandemic. She is very supportive of the potential housing crisis that we're all facing. She's supportive of finding real solutions to addressing that. And while we often have said in previous calls that we believed that a lot of the sort of bigger ticket items would be done during a post-COVID-19 recovery package, she wants housing counseling to be dealt with now. We're really excited to hear that. So because it's one of her priorities, this is pretty much essential to getting any sort of housing counseling proposal included in legislation that'll be pushed by Speaker Pelosi and any future stimulus packages. So as I said earlier, we know that that package is coming soon. We don't have an exact day. I imagine it'll probably drop in the next upcoming days. We're really excited to hear it. Once it is introduced, however, we plan to do a really big advocacy push with partners, with members, to build support for the bill, in particular the housing counseling provisions. One thing that's really important to us is that while we do advocacy for the House and Senate THUD subcommittee staff and their larger committees, that we're asking not just for the funding for housing counseling assistance, but we're also asking for administrative funds for NeighborWorks. It's just very, very important that we are working together as a community to support housing counseling funding and to make sure that when funds are available, they're able to go out the door as soon as possible. I'll leave it there. Great. If anyone has questions.
Thank you. Excellent. So Melody has been really, really critical in making this all move forward. And a few highlights I just point out. So we found that there's sort of broad support in many of the discussions on the Hill and in some of the administration as well for housing counseling to play a role not unlike what we played during the foreclosure crisis, where we worked closely with people and helped them get, in that case, to loan modification, and we'll certainly have a share of that, but we also will be doing more work with rental. But I think there's other elements of all this which we will be involved in, and very important to think about. So the proposal really ended up with NeighborWorks being the vehicle for handling the funding, and I know that there are some concerns about the many things that went well about NFMC funding, but there were also a lot of reporting requirements and some narrowness in the funding availability. A lot of this was defined by the wording in the legislation, and we are very pleased to say the legislation has much broader mandate in it and provides greater flexibility for organizations to be able to get funded for a broader range of activities. Included in this, as we've talked about this before, is we're deeply aware of the needs that you've got in the field around technology and equipment, and that's built in as a full participating actual cost in the programs. We also, and actually the original legislation had a whole piece on public outreach. This is critical. We are in a world where we can't do the homebuyer fairs anymore. We won't have the access to church meetings and things like that, and needing to really change how we do outreach in a way. And we're hoping that this will be very helpful in being able to help us become a more engaged community in the social media and things that will be able to reach isolated populations and do some broader things around that. So this is, we think, if this passes as designed, it would be very valuable. We expect the money to be spent over a couple of years, not all at one time. We have a 3-year window in which to use it in. Though if it goes faster than that, no problem. We can we'll roll with the punches as they are. So wanted to just make sure people knew about this. As Melody said, it's about to be introduced in the House. We think it'll be part of the larger package that will move out of the House. We will have a big challenge in the Senate. And again, as we've talked about in previous calls, it's very important to be talking to your senators, especially Republican senators. We are still looking for some champions to say this is an important piece to us. So if you're in Ohio or Indiana, they can be quite helpful to us. South Carolina, there are key people here that are likely to be able to help us out. West Virginia, really think about who you have in your in your state, who's in the Senate, especially Republican voices. We've gotten, I think, terrific support on the Democratic side, but really the critical issue is making sure our stuff stays in any final bill, and that will require some Republican support in the Senate. So all good news, and we'll keep you informed. And certainly, if Melody is writing you about action items, please pay attention quickly and respond in the best ways you can. That'd be very, very helpful. Just a couple quick updates. One is that we have a meeting with the head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, Kathy Kraninger. That'll be next Wednesday coming. A few of you who have already raised with us what your client experience is and what the CFPB needs to know about what's happening in the field are participating in that call. If you've got some other things that you think would be worth raising from what you're hearing from clients and challenges, and I think, and it's fine if they're in the rental field, certainly in the mortgage field, which CFPB has done a lot of work in around servicing standards. It would be very helpful to raise these right now. So please reach out to Ellie about that, and we'll report back about how that meeting goes. But it is the kind of place where we want to be able to really be giving real-time information and experience on what's happening in the field, to try to translate that into policies that may eliminate some of these problems in the future. Here's a more kind of conceptual thing I'd like to mention, and that is I do get calls periodically from like state housing finance agencies or institutions, and sometimes from local governments, about how does housing work, how should we fund it, how should we think about it. And one of the things that has really kind of resonated in some of these conversations, I think it's really important, and we need to be thinking about and describing ourselves around these terms, is to think about, and there's a number of phrases for how we describe this, but to really think about the broader implications of our work and the broad range of things that you do. So thinking about it not just in terms of you're doing pre-purchase counseling or you're helping somebody on deal with a foreclosure foreclosure and trying to get a loss solution, but also thinking, well, we deal with the bigger financial picture of the family and the household. So many of you attended the unemployment briefing we did a couple weeks ago, and certainly it's recorded and you should definitely use it, but we can play a really valuable role with people who are having trouble getting their unemployment. Food stamps, getting people into programs that have value that can help them get through this crisis and other crises. That we have the ability to mobilize and help people deal with their whole financial picture, not just the most immediate housing crisis that we're dealing with. It's kind of a case management approach. So phrases of holistic counseling, I think NeighborWorks likes to use the full cycle term, comprehensive, whoever you want to think about it. But we should be talking about this, that one of the big roles that you play actually is an informational one. And people call in the office and they're trying to get to their servicer and they can't, and you just give them the consumer portal to go in and maybe go in with them. That may not rise to the occasion of being a client file and a billable, but in fact, it's an important service we're doing. It's an important activity that we really help change people's lives with. And we need to start thinking about how to package our work in that broader sense. So thinking about that, and love your input on it, and if there are models people are using that have been able to pay for the bigger piece to all this, that's really helpful to know. Why don't we change the slide next, please? So one of our partners has been Savvy, and it's an app. They've been on our leaders call. It's very easy to use. It's been described as the TurboTax equivalent for student loan debt. It's especially strong if you have federal student loans, but it does deal with all of them. And there was always a pricing tiered structure. And if you remember, if you were a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, we got a cheaper rate. And if you remember NHRC, still cheaper. Well, they have gone free for now through July 1. And it's critical for people because people have lost their incomes. And this, for people who've been on a regular plan, this allows you to go in and get on an income-driven plan and use what your real income is. You can file through that program and get all your paperwork done at the same time. Certainly, if they're and it does expose you to the other pieces of this, like the public service loan forgiveness program and how to document that. All of that's really good. Just wanted to highlight that it's now free, and we really should make sure that clients have access to this and push it out. We sent an email about this, I think, on Tuesday, and has the links that you need for this, but it's also easily found on the internet if you want to use them. But great that it's also free, and please feel free to use it and use it with your staff too, because many of your staff have student loans as well and may be streaming. So with that quick note, let's move on to our big topic at hand. And I think I sent a note out about this morning that in a lot of ways, rental counseling will be a much bigger part of our future than it has been. That we have often favored home ownership counseling, credit counseling, foreclosure prevention counseling as our kind of bread and butter work, and rental was a part of it, but not nearly as big, and had much less of our attention, and I think of HUD's attention in some ways. And that's all changing now. So many of you are getting lots and lots of calls, lots of there's programs that are moving through. There will be, we hope, funding to subsidize some people's rents to help people get through this crisis. And as always with these programs, there will be people who fall through the cracks, and we need to be there to help manage and move people forward. So partly what we want to do is do a little bit of a step back. This will not be a training for how to become a rental counselor. We have all these great training programs that have that. What this will be is a step back to say, this is what it can look like. These are the things you need to know about, to be thinking about. these are the pieces that may allow us to get through the current crisis and also to continue the work after the crisis, but have more comprehensive programs. So one of the themes would be, how do you pay for it? That will show up in a number of the talks we do. We will do more sessions on some of the aspects of rental counseling and on emergency support grants and other programs like that, Section 8 home ownership vouchers, things that are practical pieces that help make all this work. But we are very interested in trying to get many more of your counseling agencies sophisticated and involved in the rental field. It really represents an important slice of America, of the people that we are serving, and it's become doubly critical right now. They are especially vulnerable in this particular crisis. So I want to pivot here to first looking at the federal perspective on all this. We have Kim Johnson, who has been on with us before from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, to talk about the national picture. So Kim, welcome.
Thanks so much, Bruce, and hi everyone. Thanks for having me back. My name is Kim Johnson. I'm a policy analyst with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and today I'm here to give a broad overview of what's going on federally. So we're going to start out by talking about some resources that are provided for renters in the CARES Act, and then we'll talk a little bit about the speculation around the next coronavirus relief bill. And then I'll touch on a bill that will be introduced soon to help provide some rental assistance to renters who may be struggling because of the coronavirus crisis. So let's get started with a broad overview of the CARES Act. Great. So we can kind of think of funding for housing assistance from the CARES Act in these three broad buckets. So we have emergency solutions grants, community development block grants, and coronavirus relief funds, all of which can be used to help address the housing needs of particularly low-income renters. And so for ESG, the CARES Act allotted $4 billion in ESG funding targeted towards people experiencing homelessness or people at imminent risk of homelessness at or below 50% of AMI. So for renters, that means ESG funding can be used to provide short or medium-term rental assistance for those very low-income renters at risk of homelessness. It can also be used to help address housing stability and for case management services, as well as housing navigation services to support people moving into permanent housing. There's also $5 billion in community development block grants, CDBG funding, that's generally used to assist low and moderate income households. And so the CARES Act funding can be used for rental assistance or eviction prevention funding, and can also be used for housing navigation and support services, including supporting people moving into permanent housing or supporting renters' ongoing tenancy in their current units. And then finally, we have the $150 billion in coronavirus relief funding for necessary expenditures incurred due to the coronavirus pandemic that were not accounted for in the most recent state budgets. And that money can be used for rental assistance as well as housing navigation services and services for people in supportive housing. And so I've also included a couple really handy resources. The first was developed by NLIHC and our partners at the National Alliance to End Homelessness, the National League of Cities, and U.S. mayors and CEOs for U.S. housing investments. That's the one. And so that's just guidance to state, local, tribal, and territorial governments on using CARES Act funding to address the housing needs of low-income renters. And the second is a really nifty little grid chart that just maps out the different funding that can be used for housing, how much funding was allotted, how that funding is being distributed, and different ideas for using that funding to meet the needs of the housing needs of people. So that's a very, very broad overview. My understanding is that you all will be taking a deeper dive into the nuts and bolts of CARES Act funding at a later date. So I'll spare you all of the nitty-gritty details of that for now. Next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. So for the next coronavirus relief package, unfortunately, a lot is still up in the air. So most of what I am sharing is rumors and speculation. We are anticipating that Speaker Pelosi will introduce House Democrats' priorities for the next COVID bill sometime this week. Obviously, the timing for that is winding down quickly as it is Thursday afternoon, but we are still waiting for this proposal to come out. And we do expect housing to make the list of Democratic priorities. We know that the Speaker is hoping that the list that's proposed will be more targeted than the proposal for the last coronavirus relief package. But we are confident, thanks to a lot of the advocacy from people on the ground, as well as Chairwoman Maxine Waters, that housing will be seen as one of the top Democratic priorities. And it's more at this point a matter of which programs will be funded and how much and any conditions that might apply to that funding. Right now, we know that Senate Republicans want to keep an additional relief bill small and oppose any kind of state fiscal relief. There are also a few sticking points in negotiations, including allowing funding to go to people who are not documented. I know that Republicans are also pushing, some Republicans are also pushing for protections for corporations who might face lawsuits. So there's still a lot of details to be hammered out, and that makes the exact timeline of when this next relief bill really will be introduced really hard to nail down. From what we're hearing, if the House Democrats' proposal is introduced tomorrow, there may be a vote on it as soon as next week, but again, hard to say. So that's where we are with the fourth relief package. Next, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm sure I don't need to tell you all, but there is a lot of concern over what by as much as 1.5 million as a result of the economic impact of coronavirus. There's a concern that renters will face a fiscal cliff and that without assistance, we'll see massive evictions and an uptick in homelessness. Next slide, please. Next, there you go, thank you. And so in order to address this looming concern, Representatives Waters and Heck, along with Senator Brown, have or will introduce the Emergency Rental Assistance and Rental Market Stabilization Act that would provide $100 billion in emergency rental assistance. We're expecting them to introduce that bill tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. And next slide. And so of the $100 billion provided, 40% of those funds must be used to serve households earning 30% of AMI or less. At least 70% of funds would be used to serve households at or below 50% of AMI. And the remaining funds should serve households up to 80% of AMI, although the HUD secretary can also waive that 80% of AMI limit. This is households up to 120% of AMI, as long as the needs of low-income households are sufficiently served. So there's really solid income targeting in this bill, which is nice. And funds can be used for up to 24 months of rental assistance or cover up to 6 months of back rent and late fees. And rental assistance payments would be made directly to housing providers on behalf of the tenant. The rental assistance is capped at 120% of fair market rent or small area fair market rent, but the HUD secretary would also be able to raise that limit if need be. Additionally, 25% of the funds can be used for housing relocation or stabilization services for families earning up to 50% of AMI, including things like rental application fees and security deposits, utility deposits and payments, moving costs, assistance with housing searches and placements, case management, and credit repair. Additionally, 2% of the funds would be allocated to Native American tribes and Native Hawaiians. and funding would be distributed through the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. The first half of funding would be distributed with the existing formula, and the second using a formula developed by the HUD Secretary based on need. So I also wanted to highlight, and I might have gotten my wires crossed here because Melody said earlier that the bill had not yet been introduced, but I also have a typo. So HR 6704, I saw on congress.gov that it was introduced on Tuesday by Representative Axney. It might be a different bill, but it would provide housing counseling, additional funding for housing counseling services. And so Melody covered the details of the housing counseling bill earlier, but I did just want to highlight it just because it bodes well that a bill providing funding specifically for housing counseling is supported by Chairwoman Waters. And I also wanted to just express my thanks to all of you for your great work on this. Like Bruce said earlier too, calling your senators and representatives and asking them to weigh in on the importance of housing in the next coronavirus relief bill is crucial, just to ensure that that is seen as an urgent priority among Democratic and Republican members of Congress alike. I also wanted to highlight one more nifty resource. So our research team at NLIHC developed a database of properties that are covered by the federal eviction moratorium. It is incomplete data, but it's the most complete data set, or like I guess searchable database that's out there right now, because they sourced different information from different sources in order to put it all together into this one database. So I think it excludes multifamily properties, or multifamily properties with 1 to 4 units. But otherwise, it has a lot of really nifty information, and people can look up their address and see if the home they're living in is covered by the federal eviction moratorium. So that is all I have for you, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, and I'm going to jump in with one quick question. So on the bill that is pending that will deal with subsidies for renters.
Yes.
So people experience a dramatic drop in their incomes because they've been laid off or their hours have been severely reduced. When they're evaluated on whether they're eligible for the program, is it their annual income or is it the current income after the loss of income? How does that work?
That's a great question. It would be evaluated based on their current income after their loss of income, in order to, get to that kind of urgent need based on folks who have lost their job or been furloughed due to the coronavirus crisis. That's a great question.
So are there other questions in the queue?
Mm-hmm.
So Melody,
yes,
Ellie, okay, go ahead.
Yep, there's a few questions. I just want everybody to know that yes, the recording of this session and the PowerPoint will be sent out to the leaders list. Kim, maybe if you could send me the actual links that the resource links, because people are saying they aren't, those who even can download it from the system aren't able to access the links. So I can email those links out directly to everybody.
Yep, that would be great. I can definitely do that.
Sure. Hi, sorry about that. I was just looking up the bill number. My understanding is Representative Acme has not introduced the bill yet. Bruce and I were corresponding with House Financial Services just this morning on final language. So my understanding was that the bill was not introduced yet. HR 6404, according to Congress.gov, is the Real ID Relief Act of 2020. So I think we got our wires mixed up a bit there.
Yeah, so that's actually a typo in my presentation. So it's HR 6704, not 6404.
One way or the other, it's about to happen if it hasn't happened. So I'm sure it's the same bill talking about.
Yes. 2 questions. Someone has asked, will there be anything made available onto the various housing finance agencies to assist those who might need the emergency rental assistance that you mentioned?
That is a good question. I am not sure. So let me make sure I understand the question correctly. It's asking, would there be money available for housing finance agencies through this bill?
I believe that's how they're asking it, yes.
Okay, yeah, so my understanding of the bill is that the money would be given directly to landlords, but on behalf of tenants. So I don't, it would get to landlords in that kind of, I mean, I guess it's a direct way, but there's nothing specifically for housing finance agencies.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure where that came from. Would the rental assistance apply for non-UD funded properties?
For non-UD funded?
Yes.
Yes. So the bill is more specifically for buildings that are not already receiving housing assistance, in part because people who are receiving housing assistance can do an income recertification with public housing agencies in order to, make sure that their subsidy is aligned with their income. And so this bill is more specifically targeted towards renters who are living in units that are not assisted.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, are those all landlords and affiliated with HUD directly, or can it be indirectly as well?
Indirectly as well, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, renters are asking now, how do they fill out an application for renters financial assistance today? Do you have any comments or thoughts about that?
Ooh, that is a good question. So I am not 100% sure. I think that it would really depend on whether, since there's no funding, like federal funding specifically for rental assistance, it's all kind of funneled through ESG or CDBG or the Coronavirus Relief Fund. There's not a kind of, whether or not a renter can file for rental assistance really depends on whether or not the state or city that they're living in has a rental assistance program. So the unsatisfying answer is that it would really depend.
This is Ellie, and I just want to jump in really quickly to let everybody on the call know that in relation to the CARES Act funds that Kim mentioned, we are going to do a deeper dive on that stuff next week on our call. So be looking out for the registration link for that. We'll have several organizations from states around the country that have done a lot of statewide work, and with a little bit of a lens on this kind of CDBG funding and how to access it. And we're going to be bringing in somebody who can talk on the higher, in more detail about the real basic stuff that Kim just talked about. We are going to have somebody on who will talk in more detail. So a lot of these questions around specifically how to access those funds are going to get addressed next week.
Thanks. Will there be resources for affordable housing providers? Will there be an exception for the low-income housing tax credit and similar properties?
So that's a really interesting question, because there is a lot of debate right now around whether or not LIHTC properties technically, whether or not LIHTC properties in like total are technically covered by like the federal eviction moratorium, for example. And so I imagine that this bill would be, people residing in LIHTC properties would be able to access this funds or funding from this $100 billion proposal. But that is a very good question, and I would have to look more into it and kind of circle back on that.
Thanks. Final question. It's our hope that any additional housing counseling funding unlimited to NeighborWorks programs would exclude a number of regions around the country from accessing these resources, and could potentially disadvantage other HUD-certified housing counseling programs. Do you have any comments on that, or Bruce?
This is a Bruce question. I'll jump in. So I think there are a couple underlying issues here. So there will be opportunities for groups that are not affiliated with an intermediary. So one path is through it. If you're affiliated with an intermediary, the state housing finance agencies, the same way that it was under NFMC, they will do it as well. There will be NeighborWorks does have, it's in the same way as they did last time. There'll be a set aside for NeighborWorks, but they can't. The NeighborWorks organizations can't use more than 15% of the total allocation can be devoted just to them. And the only reason for that is the reason they're not treated as regular intermediaries is that they're also handling the NeighborWorks is actually handling the contract, so they'd be in a position of awarding it to themselves. So then saying the local ones need to compete on their own merits, and then strengths of the program, but also some challenging aspects, and we're working to try to make those less a problem. Certainly, if you have a very specific thing, shoot me an email, because we will be in active discussions around this. I think we did a lot of work to try not to have the definitions in the legislation narrow out the opportunities for organizations. We thought that this would be a national challenge. It's hit the country all around. We want to make sure it works in rural areas. We want to make sure it works in small towns. We want to make sure it works in large cities as well. So I hope that answers the question, but give me an email if there's still some concerns there.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Oh, okay.
I thought you said last question, but if there's another one, let's squeeze it in.
Yeah, another one did pop up. Sorry. The final one is, have any contact been made to include, this is an incomplete question, if Patricia wants to re-ask it, but can local legal aid associations and organizations work with housing counseling agencies for funding to represent evictions?
So I think the question is, is that built into the proposal we made on housing counseling? And it's not.
Yeah.
There is separate legal services funding, and so they have their own stream of things. There should be a lot of interest in counseling agencies working with legal services everywhere to be able to intervene on evictions. I think this financial cliff issue is going to be a very big deal for all of us, and there'll be a critical component on it. And I'll just remind people, we had a really good session with Cleveland Housing Network, SCH, and a couple months ago around a pilot program along those lines.
Okay, that's everything.
Good, thank you so much. So Ellie, let me turn it all over to you, and you did all the work on this, lining people up and organizing this, so let me hand it over.
Great, thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Kim.
Hi, everyone. Yes, and thank you, Kim, yes. Hi, everyone. So we are going to move now to talking about some of the nuts and bolts around rental counseling, and what to be thinking about if it's something that you will be considering, and hopefully you are, because it's kind of the new buzzword, the rental counseling. So we're going to start with David Young with Housing Action Illinois. David's been on with us a few times. So David, take it away.
Great, thank you, Ellie, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give a brief presentation today about rental housing. By owners, and 43 million of those, nearly 44 million of those, occupied by renters. So that's a huge population of people that need services, and we expect for that number of renter-occupied units and number of renters to continue to grow in the United States. Next slide, please. So what does a rental counselor do? Provides tools, resources, and information to assist clients with decisions, and really helps to meet a client's needs and preferences without influencing the client or promoting specific entities. So, you know, much like we have done on the pre-purchase side, we look to provide assistance to consumers and giving them information so that they can make the best decision for themselves without steering them towards a specific outcome or a specific service. Next slide, please. So as managers and directors, as you're thinking about adding a housing counseling program, we know that there are resources currently, or there will soon be additional resources to help organizations that want to add rental to their suite of services. But once you add a rental housing program or a rental housing counseling program, the expectation is that you're going to continue to have that program. So you really have to think about how are you going to sustain that program long term, and what financial resources are going to be available to you to sustain a robust program. So, you know, as any of us that have run these programs or run organizations, it's the thing that you're always thinking about as you're looking to add a new program is how are you going to be able to sustain it over the long term. Next slide, please. So you have a couple of different clients that you could serve in a rental counseling program. One, you could serve, of course, tenants, but you also have the ability to serve landlords. So for example, you might have a one-on-one program where you are helping tenants with specific services, and then maybe you are offering that you're offering group training to landlords, especially people who are just becoming landlords, and then you can provide training to help those folks as they're learning to be good landlords. Next slide, please. And then, you know, your potential rental clients are going to come from a couple of different places. You might have new renters, someone that's never rented an apartment before and is looking for, has all sorts of questions and is looking for answers about what to do, how to apply, looking at the lease, all of those things. You might have a current renter that has a lease issue or a landlord issue, or you might even find a current homeowner that's looking to transition to rental. And I have a perfect example of that in my own family. When my parents retired a couple of years ago, they sold the family home, they moved to Las Vegas, and they decided to rent a townhome instead of buying another house. And my parents had not rented an apartment since they had been newlyweds nearly 45 years earlier. So they, of course, had a lot of questions about what it was going to mean to be a renter and who was responsible for what and all of those things. And so that's a very important place where you, as a housing counseling organization, can provide an important service. So next slide, please. So as you are looking at putting together a good counseling session, you really want to think about what are the needs of this particular person that you're seeing, because the needs are going to be a little bit different depending on who your client is. One client might need this, or one client might need that. So it's going to be really important to listen to what those individual needs are, and then to look to meet them. You want to, much as we do on our pre-purchase side, is put together a budget, put together an action plan, have a conversation about fair housing, because all of those things are as equally important to a renter as they're going to be to someone that is looking to purchase a home, or someone that already owns a home. So, and I just can't emphasize enough making sure that you are looking at the individual needs of your clients, and then helping them meet those, as opposed to saying, I understand, and here's a package that I'm going to give you that doesn't necessarily meet their needs. Next slide, please. So again, many of you are studying for the individual certification exam, so you're very familiar with the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and understand that this applies to renters as well as homeowners. Next slide, please. Also, want to make sure that you are very aware of your state and local laws. Your laws will differ depending on what city or what state that you are in. For example, in the city of Chicago and New York City, there are heat ordinances. You know, there's a minimum daytime temperature in the city of Chicago of 68 degrees during the winter time, and if the temperature falls below that, then you know, the landlord could be in violation. And so those are things that you want to make sure that you understand. And then another example is in Cook County, as well as in the city of Chicago, there's a source of income ordinance. So in some places you might have a landlord that says Section 8 not allowed. Well, that is illegal in the city of Chicago and Cook County to discriminate against source of income. So those are things as a rental housing counselor that you want to understand. And then, you know, just as important as the session itself is the record keeping, is making sure that you have established the case file number, that you have all of the disclosure and privacy statements, that you have the budget and analysis of your client's income and expenses, and the action plan signed and dated by the clients and the counselor, and any other pertinent documents. Just like with your pre-purchase and other counselings, you know that that HUD is going to look at files during a performance review. So you want to make sure that you are in the habit of establishing your rental files exactly as you would any other files, so that you don't have any observations or findings at a time of the performance review. And then for your evictions, you know, a lot of people are going to be coming to you with questions about an eviction. And so you need to understand very clearly the reasons that a tenant can or cannot be evicted in your community, and what is the process regarding that eviction. How many days notice must they receive? What happens when they go to court? Because anyone that comes to see you is really going to want to understand, especially if they've received a summons that's requiring them to go to court. They're going to be very nervous, and will need your reassurance on what that process is going to be and what they should do. And then you also, and someone referenced this a little bit earlier, but you want to have a connection with legal aid or another legal aid organization within your community that may be able to represent that tenant in court. We don't want to encourage tenants to go to court on their own because they are often put at a disadvantage. So if you are able to refer them to legal aid or another organization to help represent them in court, that would be very good. So we have we have our fundamentals of rental housing counseling training, which will go into a lot more detail about what I briefly talked about today. Because we've had some real interest from the counseling industry in getting more rental housing counseling training, we've added an additional section. So we have one at the end of May, May 27th through 29th, and then we will have another one August 3rd through 5th. Housing Action Illinois is a HUD-funded housing counselor trainer. So you can find information about our rental housing as well as our other trainings on our website, and that link is included. So this has been just a really brief about tips and tools regarding rental, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take those. Thank you.
Thanks, David. We are going to go to questions a little bit later. First, we're going to E.B. Jokic from the National Community and give us some of her perspective on rental counseling. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ellie. I appreciate it. Good afternoon. We'll just take a closer look at some of those key components of rental counseling and how some of those reminders that we should be bearing mention to during this COVID-19 pandemic. And so while we're all impacted by COVID-19, one of the strengths of the housing counseling program itself is demonstrated flexibility to shift the focus to address national needs. As a field, many of us have been shifting from foreclosure to pre-purchase and now have a need to focus on rental counseling, which for some agencies will serve as a new line of services. So some of the considerations, it's imperative to keep your intermediary in the loop of any changes your organization is anticipating making to your program. If you do not have an intermediary, you'll want to be in contact with HUD directly. You want to be certain to note if the suggested changes to your work plan are temporary and for what period of time. Rental counseling itself should occur before the client pursues obtaining, sorry, there's a little bit of feedback. Rental counseling should occur before the client pursues obtaining new or alternative rental housing while experiencing a challenge within a current rental situation and immediately if the client is facing eviction. So counselors must complete a formal intake. Many on this call will reference funding sources for rental counseling specifically, but all of this will really centralize around your agency's ability to collect pertinent client level data during the intake process. In that, there should be a needs assessment that you can utilize to guide your interaction with the client. Where appropriate, counselors should review and analyze clients' credits, always documenting expenses and income, debt to income ratio, recommendations for debt management and savings, and rental affordability. Renting is an integral part of the pathway to housing and really a pathway to ownership. And so as much as possible, we should possibility with clients. A number of our LMI consumers never see themselves as homeowners because they're not having conversations with professionals that can help them see themselves in space. And here in the form of rental counseling is an absolutely integral opportunity for you to explore buying as an analysis opportunity with your clients. Next slide, please. Okay. Finding acceptable rental housing, understanding that terms
Oh, we've lost you, Ibijoke.
And absolutely.
Oh,
I'm sorry?
okay. You popped out for a second.
So finding acceptable rental housing, understanding the terms of the rental agreement, fair housing from a national, local, and state level is absolutely important, understanding those protections. For those jurisdictions with source of income discrimination, you'll want to pay attention to any pending spikes due to the significant increase in the number of consumers filing and receiving unemployment. Next slide, please. So collaborating with those county municipalities is critically important. The HUD certification actually applies to more than housing counseling. And so we've been talking for a while as a field on how important it is to collaborate with those other entities that are applicable. The same will carry true for your rental counseling. You can find more information on these programs on the HUD exchange.com on their website. Some of these programs will include the family self-sufficiency, neighborhood stabilization, continuum of care. It's really important that you're developing relationships to make adequate referrals to organizations, whether it's legal aid or some of these other players that we have mentioned that, again, are subject to the final rule and should be collaborating with your organizations. In your counseling, you want to be certain to document and include written action plan, and that your counselors are engaging in follow-up. It's absolutely important that you're using the proper CMS systems and relying on HUD and your intermediary program to serve as a point of contact and guide. For your record retention, you want to be certain to stay compliant with what is been federally recommended to you and what also adheres to your local state and municipalities, that guidance for at least a minimum of 3-year record retention. But be mindful in this period of virtual and remote counseling on establishing a consistent practice for your counselors across the board. As Dave mentioned, we're subject to any pending audits or performance reviews from HUD or your intermediary. And you want to make certain that consistency is key, especially if you want to ensure that there's no disruption to your delivery of services. For a training aspect, within 18 months of hiring, on the competencies and skills. During that, every year you're participating in continuing education to continue to maintain these services. Next slide.
Ibijoke, you're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if you're moving around or something, but just so you know it.
Okay, Bruce, can you hear me okay?
Beautifully now.
Wonderful, I'm glad. All right, so you guys, I want to make certain that you familiarize yourself with the following: the CARES Act, eviction moratorium, unemployment, and the various acts that have come out. I know we're in a very unpredictable time, and we're having weekly, if not daily, updates, but making certain that you all have a mechanism in place for how your counselors are staying abreast with this information and relaying it over to consumers will be absolutely important as you begin to strengthen the rental counseling that you're offering and tailor it specifically to the current needs. Next slide, please. All right, so some of the resources here that I'd recommend, definitely taking a look at the national industry standards for rental housing counseling. You also, it never hurts to have that 7610 housing counseling handbook available at your disposal. And also we have our resource page available on our NCRC website, and we have tons of great training opportunities for you guys to learn a little bit more about virtual and remote counseling, especially for those that are newly embarking on rental counseling as a service type. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ibijoke. So, Melody, do we have questions specific for David and Ibijoke?
Yes, we do. You will give me one moment to pull this up. Yes. So Question: is anyone willing to share their This might take a bit. Is anyone willing to share their program design and any policies or procedures they have in place for an agency that wants to start offering rental counseling?
So I'll just jump in and say that we are, after we're done with this section Q&A, we're going to move to 3 groups that have specific programs, and they are providing their contact information. So everybody can reach out to those groups.
Okay. I say we then just go ahead and jump to the next section of the presentation. So I imagine there'll be many questions attached to that.
Okay, great. So we are going to go right directly to Todd Capiteo with Tabor Community Services. He's going to talk a little bit about an eviction prevention program that they're doing. Todd.
Yes, actually, you can go to the next slide right away. So basically, when I talked with Ellie and Bruce, that what we were seeing in our area, we've been doing rental counseling from 1968 until the present in many different forms, many different programs. We're a unique agency where we actually have counseling in our financial empowerment center, but we start all the way back we also run a homeless shelter, a 52-room homeless shelter. So we have the whole continuum from shelter to housing. And what we were seeing is the major gap in our community, and I know we're not alone, and I'm going to focus in on what we call eviction prevention counseling. And so we found that there was a lack of funds being put out there to help assist. Now, I know that there's going to be funds in this COVID-19 era right now, but on the normal everyday stuff, that there was no funds for those folks until they were actually homeless. So we were trying to look for different things. We tried to focus on different areas. We did finally come up, and I'll go into it a little bit later, an income source for us to be able to start doing this. But most of the homeless funding was kind of off limits at this point, or very minimal. It did take, we started back in 2018. We did have a program like this in the past. This is a little bit different iteration of it. But about 6 or 8 months after we started a coalition within our community that has roughly about 12 organizations now and municipalities joining in. So basically, what is this? How is this different than your normal rental counseling? Is that we're focusing just on people that have some sort of written notice from their landlord. Now, that written notice could be a text message saying, you're late with your rent and you need to pay. It doesn't have to be from the magistrate or district justice or whatever saying you have 10 days, you have 5 days, whatever days in order to get out of the actual property. So that was a lot different than what we've done previously. The other part is we only deal with folks that have an arrearage because of loss of income. Now that could be because of a death in the family, that could be a divorce, separation, that could be health issues, or it could be just I lost my job or got furloughed, those type of things. We do not deal with all kinds of other issues that could be causing eviction, that could be causing an issue between the landlord and tenant. But those are the ones that we try to focus on, at least initially for this program. And it's been going fairly well since 2018. Each client that comes in, we form an action plan with that client, allows them to pay back the rent. Some of that could be through assistance funding, but we're finding out that we're able to pay a lot of it back through a forbearance agreement with the negotiation of the landlord. So instead of paying $1,000 in arrearage funds directly out of the assistance program, we may only have to do $300 or $400, and the rest the client's able to pay over time, whether that's 3 months, 6 months, or whatever the landlord or property manager is willing to do. Unlike rental counseling as well, we do build a pretty strong relationship with landlords and property managers through the process. That was happening somewhat through our rental counseling, but it didn't happen all the time and not with all the programs. So we play an active role in the whole process of getting tenants to communicate with landlords and again, landlords communicating with tenants, that both sides have certain rights in this process, and we want to make sure everyone's being honored in that process, that it's not just going from one direction. Outcomes so far, on average, it's to keep someone in their existing housing is only $700 per person versus nearly $4,000 per person to stay in our family shelter. Now that $4,000 is over the life of that they're in shelter, and on average, people are in the shelter between 4 and 5 months. So it's one of those type of things that number is going to be larger because of the amount of time they're there, but it's a lot less stress and trauma on the family if we can keep them in place. And we're not doing, if we weren't doing this work for the last 2 years, we wouldn't be set up for this crisis. Right now, we're prepared for this time because of what we've already been doing, and now we've rolled out basically the 2.0 version of the eviction prevention program for COVID relief. That program's going to look quite a bit different than what we're doing right now, and we're focusing on getting funding from different sources that's already been brought up through ESG and CDBG, and also through local funding that different groups, the United Way and other sources are putting together within our community. Next slide. So how did we get here? I think one of the biggest things, obviously, I brought up earlier, and I would bring it up again, that we needed funding, and don't we all? We all need some sort of funding to be able to run this program as well as other programs. A key thing that we have available is we do have a grant writer. And I know talking with Ellie here, prepping for this call, that it said, well, make sure we want to bring that part up, because even a part-time grant writer, if she's part-time for us, is pivotal in helping for not only to write the grant, but also to find the grant. She's part of a team. Our development team has multiple folks, and they're always on the lookout for new types of sources. And the cool thing is when you have the same grant writer writing grants over and over again, especially on the same thing, let's say like eviction prevention, they can go back to previous grants. It makes the process much easier to ask another organization for basically the same type of funding if you're not able to fund it completely through another source. The main source of funds was through PHFA, which is our Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. We submitted the grant and we were denied, which again, I'm sure we've all been there. I think a key part of that process that was partially from our grant writer and partially from folks that were in the process, that we went back and asked for feedback. And they told that they liked the idea. They just didn't like how we had it set up, because we also were asking for other things at the same time. So we kind of wanted to focus in on just the eviction prevention. When we applied again, we got approved. Now, we only got about 40% of the funding, but it was enough at least to get the program started, because it was a big ask. And since then, we've received another round, but now we've been able to acquire other grants, because it's easier to show people while the bike's moving, when you're pedaling already, to say, okay, this is actually working. Let's see if we can join in there, versus this is just an idea. We know there's a need, but we don't know what type of numbers are coming up. So our grant writer has been a huge part of that process, and a key being able to write so many grants. And we're going to get declined, but we do get a lot of approvals as well. So I think a grant writer in this type of process especially will pay for themselves in most instances. But I wanted to just give you a brief overview of what was there. We've been doing the eviction prevention here, like I said, since 1968. We were kind of founded on that. It was discrimination within our community of folks not being able to find housing, rental or otherwise. That kind of how we founded, and we've been doing that ever since. So when there's questions later on, I'd love to take any questions that you may have, and I'll hand it back over.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Okay. Our next speaker is Karen Hausneck-Yetman with Belmont Housing Resources for Western New York. Karen was on before and talked with us about the Go Buffalo Moms program that they do there. And so she's going to talk with us now about their rental counseling program. Karen.
Thanks, Ellie. Hi, so I'm Karen. I work here in Buffalo, New York. You can go next slide. So Belmont Housing Resources, of course, we're on the call today. We're a HUD certified housing counseling agency, but we were actually founded to administer the Housing Choice Voucher Program, or what you might know as Section 8. We help about 6,000 families a year through that program. We also manage about 20 different apartment complexes throughout our region, and we do housing development and rehab. So with our HUD certified housing counseling, rental fit right into everything else we were doing. So we do rental counseling, we help first-time home buyers, we do post-purchase, foreclosure prevention, and we have 2 certified HECM counselors as well. Next slide. So when we talk about our foreclosure prevention and our rental counseling, we call this more our housing stability programming. So we look at the funding that helps families either find housing or stay in their housing. So our programming, like Ellie had mentioned, we do a hospital-based program called Go Buffalo Mom in different prenatal clinics. We also have housing coaches within some of our local public schools. We work with our Housing Choice Voucher families to help them find housing. We administer the Family Self-Sufficiency Program for the Housing Choice Voucher, and our FSS coordinators are also certified housing counselors and have passed the test, which is great. And then we also receive referrals through our community partners. So that's really where people are coming to us to receive rental counseling. So we have a variety of funding that we kind of piece together so we can make this full housing counseling program. We go to the next slide. Today, I just want to talk a little bit about, we've been doing rental counseling now for about 20 years. And over the last 12 years, we've had staff dedicated only to doing rental counseling. And so, which was great. And then, but our rental counseling has grown because it's a definitely needed service. And if you know anything about Buffalo, New York, we've had a lot of growth in our region. With growth comes in more expensive rent, more expensive housing. And so we've had a lot more people coming to us looking for help with rent. So our housing counseling team lead and myself kind of took a step back and did what we called a journey map of our services, which is always, I think, a good place to start if you're either expanding a program or thinking of starting a new program, to kind of go and do a couple different timelines. So when someone gets referred to your agency or hears about your rental counseling program, what kind of process are they going to go through when they get to your agency? So thinking about what's their journey going to look like. And then when you think about your housing counselors, what's their caseload going to look like? What's their, how many people are they going to serve at a time? What are we going to look at for, number of families per month, per quarter, per year that they're going to serve? And then what are kind of the things that you need to think about when you're creating that program? So if you have the ability to do it, it's really a great way to get started. And that's how we kind of updated the way that we were doing our services and how we looked at the referrals that were coming into Belmont Housing. So next slide. So after we did this whole mapping of our services, we saw that we had a lot of referrals coming in, whether it be from the continuum of care, from 211, from our schools, from our hospitals. I kind of took a step back and said, just like you may have done 10 years ago with foreclosure, that we needed a better way to kind of track the referrals. And I was worrying also about the bandwidth of our counselors. I wanted to make sure that not one counselor was getting too many people, while others maybe weren't getting as many, and that we're serving the community the best that we could. So using different AmeriCorps position and also from our local university, we had some interns. We were able to kind of redesign the way people come and get our services. So now when someone's looking for our services, they go through our intake counselor, which right now is an AmeriCorps person. So she takes in the information, she figures out, how to refer, like who needs referrals, tracking how many referrals each counselor is getting each week, and then doles that out to the most appropriate program at that time. Whether it be one of our housing and financial coaches who focus more on case management while doing housing counseling and thinking of more of a holistic view of the family, whether it be a housing counselor to help, with maybe eviction procedures or quick counseling to find units, or one of our family self-sufficiency coaches if it's part of the Housing Choice Voucher program. And also through our continuum care grant, we are able to hire what's called a landlord outreach specialist. So this landlord outreach specialist talks to landlords, does trainings with them, talks about the benefits of different community programs. So what is great about, getting a Section 8 housing choice voucher tenant? What are the different, grants available through ESG, the Emergency Food and Shelter Grant? And then also being able to get landlords to list their properties with him, so then he can share that with our housing counselors to help not only find subsidized units, but also to find private landlords for our community residents to rent. So next slide. So like I said, we had used some interns from our local university, and they had gone out and they had interviewed a lot of different community members to find out when they come and meet with us, what would they need to have. So they interviewed us. We had a staff person who interviewed different housing agencies in the area, like our homeless shelters and other housing development agencies, to kind of find out what would they need from us. And then we also kind of thought, what do we need as counselors to be able to serve these families and help them find a new rental unit? So when someone comes to us, there's 3 questions we start with before we do any services. The first question is, if someone walks in to get our services, we ask, do you have a place to sleep tonight? I know that may kind of sound simple, but we have found that we had people who were either coming to us who maybe were living in their cars, maybe they had just been evicted, maybe they're, it's them and their kids and they're living on their sister's couch. They don't have a really a place to sleep tonight. And rental counseling is great. It's something we want to help them with, but we want to make sure that they have a safe place right now to sleep. So that's why we kind of start with that question to kind of find out, where are they and what can we do to make sure that they're safe right now. If they have a safe place to sleep, our next thing we look at is, do you have income or assistance to pay rent? Because if we can go through our whole entire intake process, we can start doing the budget, we can, start talking about referral services and things like that. But if they're going to be evicted because they can't pay the rent because they have no income, their first step isn't rental counseling. The first step would be to go and apply for unemployment insurance, to apply for public assistance, or find some way to get some income in, so that way they could pay rent. So until they have at least some sort of income to pay their rent, whether it be, rent income or, different programs out there, we refer them out to that before they come and do any rental counseling. And the third question that we decided that we wanted to ask is, are you already working with another housing agency for your goals? I always kind of say that, especially in our area, I feel there's enough clients to go around, that we could, be working and turning out people every single day, and there's more people that need help with rental counseling. So if they're already working with another great partner in our area, that's who they should be working with. That working with them and working with us is just a duplication of services. So we want to make sure that that they're not already receiving services for housing. And so for each one of these steps, we have a handout. So if the person meets with the intake counselor, we find out they don't have income, we made a handout about how to go and get income. So they can do that before meeting with us. But once these questions are answered, and if they're going to move on to rental counseling on the next slide, we start by giving them a packet of information. So of course, you're going to give things that you're going to give out for any of your counseling services, your intake, your budget, financial analysis. But some other things we added to that is we let them know what to expect at their rental counseling appointment. I mentioned that we're a Minister of Public Housing Authority. We do the Section 8 housing choice vouchers. That when someone comes to us for rental assistance, sometimes they may have been thinking that by meeting with us, they are getting the housing choice voucher. Unfortunately, that's not something we're able to do. So we gave them a sheet of paper to kind of know what to expect and what a rental counseling session is going to be. A couple of things we give them to kind of prepare is we give them this rental history cheat sheet, which is just, where they lived in the past 3 years. When you apply for any, either private landlord or complex, they're going to want to know your rental history. And sometimes it may take people a minute or two to remember where they lived, especially if maybe they've moved around a few times. So we wanted to get that, have them think about that before they come in for their appointment. We do a needs and wants worksheet that is specific to rental counseling. And then also other resources to find rental housing, you know, whether it be our tax credit properties or subsidized housing or other resources to find housing in our area. So next slide. So I'm just going to talk now just a little bit of our lessons learned and a few tips that I have if you're thinking about either starting or growing a program. First thing is that it's definitely great to talk to your partner organizations and interview your target population or others in your community to find out what's already happening and how you can partner better together. I'll share that, you know, when people were coming to us, we had this great list of all the homeless shelters in the area. So if someone came to us and said that they didn't have a place to sleep tonight, we had a list that we give to people and say, like, look to see what fits into your, you know, what you qualify for and go and apply to stay there. Well, we found out that that's not the way our housing shelters work anymore, that there's a coordinated entry and they have to call 211. So by us giving this list of shelters, it was actually kind of doing a disservice because the person might have been traveling around where we could just say, okay, we have our phones in our lobby, here, go call 211 and see where you can get placed tonight. So you want to talk to make sure that you have the most updated information for the different housing services in your area. I also say from a management standpoint that, you know, creating some sort of process to track your caseloads for your housing counselors to make sure, again, you're being equitable between your different housing counselors, how many cases each housing counselor is getting, depending on the service that they're providing, and tracking that either through your client management system or through, you know, another source like an Excel document or something like that. The other lesson learned, you know, update your tools to meet the needs of rental clients. That a budget for a rental housing is going to be slightly different than the tool you might use for when someone is either doing a foreclosure or maybe for pre-purchase. So look at your tools and see if it makes sense for the rental counseling you're doing. And also, if you can, market to recruit families sooner. Before we started this, we had a lot of people coming to us that eviction was imminent. You know, what's going to happen within days, sometimes hours. And at that point in time, you know, we would do referrals, but there wasn't much we could have done with rental counseling, where if you can market sooner, you can get people before that they're going to be forced out of their house. On the next page. And then just a few tips. You know, you might want to check with your state attorney general to kind of see what resources they have and different tenant laws and things to think about when you're working with families. Definitely contacting your nonprofit legal resources. As housing counselors, we know that, you know, for foreclosure, our nonprofit legal partners are great, and they also are for rental counseling too. And if you can, you know, interview partner agencies, find out what they're doing, and interview your target population to find out what needs they have and how you can best fit those needs. Next slide. So here's my contact information. So again, I work for Belmont Housing Resources in Buffalo, New York, and feel free if you have any questions or anything to give me a call.
Great, thanks, Karen. So our next presenter is Russell Graves with Consumer Credit and Budget Counseling, doing business as National Foundation for Debt Management. So Russell, take it away.
Thank you. And Karen, I am mighty impressed by your processes, your planning and preparation. Consumer Credit and Budget Counseling has had to back into some of these services along the way, and want to tell some people about the tips and different things that we did through the process. We first got involved with rental counseling when the Sandy program came around, Superstorm Sandy, and we were doing tenant-based rental assistance and different things like that. And then Governor Murphy from New Jersey came around, and he expanded one of our foreclosure mediation programs to include temporary rental counseling to get some help out during the C-19 crisis out to the public. And so this became part of the program, so we had to dust off the old program and get it going. And I want to show you some of the things we learned along the way, how you can transition some of your counselors to the different programs, and give you a little head start on some of these things. 1 out of 3 renters cannot afford to pay their rent, and that really became a problem with the C19. Just it increased, and I think that number is going up. So what we did is we started with an action plan. Okay, we took our rental counseling action plan and tried to figure out what the client needed to know. And this is the bottom part of the action plan. These are what we as a counseling agency will do for the client. And one of the things that HUD point of contacts have told us through the years is that our action plans didn't include enough of the things that we would do, because the client signs it and we sign it. So what I did is took the bottom part, what we will do, we'll provide FICO credit scores. And, that's something that's simple. I don't know if everybody's using the FICO open access model, but you can just plug in the score and 2 codes, and it prints out the information for the client, and then we can present the client with their actual score or scores. And it certainly is a tool. That's something our counselors know about. They know about the foreclosure counselors as well as the first-time homebuyer counselors. We provide a personalized action plan on people's credit. When we're doing first-time homebuyer class, we have to go through their credit report and have to come up with to determine, are they a near-term purchaser or a long-term client. And so your first-time homebuyer classes, your pre-purchase housing counselors will know how to put together this action plan, a budget. The first thing we all know is that you can analyze your budget and take a look at it compared to other situations. I know I've seen in the last 20 years tons of budgets, and we can point to things that may or may not be available to you. And the next part are specific to rental counseling, providing referrals, a letter to the landlord diversion, and relocation assistance. And I'll go through these separately. If you can go to the next slide. Okay. Okay, well, I forgot referrals. There's not a slide there, but referrals is the same type of the same type of things that we do with most housing counseling clients. The legal services, the legal aid lawyers, the unemployment insurance, the food stamps, all these other things that we get involved in when we do foreclosure or default counseling. The next thing on the list is, providing a letter that we can use for our counselors for our clients. One of the things that New Jersey's governor did just at the end of last month is allowed for the use of the rental deposit to be used for the actual rent, and can be used for future rent and past due rent and any fees that have accrued. Well, the landlords, as you can imagine, didn't want to hear this and absolutely said no. So what we did is we put together a letter that used all the terms and the different provisions in the law, and then we take with form letters, we always run it by an attorney to look at it, to make sure we're saying the right things, to make sure that it hits all the points it's got to hit. So having these type of letters, telling landlords that one, you can't make payment because of COVID-19. We have a letter that says that. We have one that invokes this security deposit law, because we want the counselors to have those things in front of us. So what we do is we sell them. When we look at relocation assistance, go ahead, you can move to the next one. When we look at relocation assistance, there are a number of ways to find places to live. The State Housing Finance Agency has tax subsidized properties, and they typically in New Jersey, we have one that actually lists all the properties that are for rent and all the the ones that take Section 8. local newspapers, online searches, apartments.com, Trulia, Zillow. Some of our clients don't have the access to some of these resources, and we can tell them to go to the library, but sometimes it's easier just when they're sitting there just to give them a view. We used to, when we got doing the Sandy, we started putting together any apartments in the counties that were available under $1,000. For some that may seem a lot, some a little, but in South Jersey that was a fairly good price. So what we were allowing them to do is come in and get some ideas on where to move. We go to the next one. Okay, now the one thing your counselors have to know, and the easiest thing to do, is find your state tenant laws and get the handbooks. New Jersey is about 107 pages long, so we actually ordered them for all of our counselors. We kept up with the updates, the COVID pandemic updates, the executive orders that the governor was trying to help. And just so your counselors have that at their desk in case there's questions they can't answer. Now, they are not obviously giving legal advice, but what they are giving is pointing to different things. We send all those questions that have any legal ramifications right to the legal aid lawyers or the legal services. Okay, next. Now, how do you fund these things? There's a number of things we've talked today about: the CARES Act, the CDBG grants that are available for the CARES Act itself, $3.4 billion nationwide. Those break out by the states. There's also regular CDBG funds, home funds, housing trust funds. Now, because of the pandemic, waivers are available to reallocate those funds. So old home funds that you haven't paid down can be used for community-based programs, including counseling. And I keep telling people this because it's very important, all housing counseling has to be provided by certified housing counselors after August 1st, 2020. So if your home fund or your different first-time homebuyer funds and different things like that include a counseling provision, then it only can be provided by certified housing counselors. And they can't just refer people out to them. They have to put in, and you have to lobby to have them add them as part of the program so that they can be paid by these programs. How we're getting funded, as I said, was a state housing agency through the expanded foreclosure program. Now, those are ways to do it. There is also those increased HUD housing counseling grants we heard about, $700 million. I can't, those are huge for NFMC. There's also some housing counseling grants, period. I understand that are going through. All these things can be used for more than foreclosure clients this time. They're talking about rental counseling. When we put all these things together, we put it all on our website, and I'm going to give everybody the website, which is cc-bc.com, and that's cat-boycat.com. And if you go to our rental counseling, the complete action plan is there, and it talks about how to get the person ready, how to work on their budget, and different things, not just the end part, what we're going to do. But it's truly not a heavy lift to transition your foreclosure and your first-time home buyer counselors, pre-purchase home buyer counselors, into this program as the need exists. Put these things together fairly quickly. We looked at it. We were providing it on a part-time, but then all of a sudden our phones exploded, like I'm sure many of yours did, and we were able to use the state funds to fund these type of operations. And we've got 175 clients in about 3 short weeks who are needing counseling, and we're providing that counseling to them. And I think that's the end.
It is. Thank you. Thank you, Russell. So before we go to questions, I just want to let everybody know, Kim earlier mentioned that they, on the NLIHC website, have a lookup tool for, in general, to see if if a landlord has a mortgage that is a federally backed mortgage and is therefore impacted by the CARES Act. But this just came out a couple of days ago. This is the FHFA multifamily loan lookup tool. So this doesn't help with the small 1 to 4 family units, but it does give you the opportunity to look and see if a multifamily loan is covered by, if it is FHFA is one of the GSEs is the investor, and if it is then subject to the CARES Act moratorium and other rules. So with that, are there other questions, Melody?
There's quite a few. The C-19 Executive Order Know Your Rights pamphlets, are they available in all states? And if yes, where can folks on the phone obtain them?
Okay, that was just your basic landlord-tenant book that's offered by our state legal aid society, I believe, and we just downloaded that, and we recommend when we do our landlord counseling that the landlord does it as well.
Thank you.
Melody, I'll just say that I would suggest that people start by looking at their state attorney general's website to see if there's something there.
Thank you. This goes to the larger group. If tenants do not have a formal lease agreement written out, will this make a difference for those consumers knowing that they have a written lease agreement is definitely the best path, but they were just curious? So how would you do rental counseling for those who don't have written or formal lease agreements? To anyone?
Yeah,
So,
I would say
month to month. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that if it's a current lease that they're in, we would suggest that when that lease is over, whether it be month to month or year lease, that they switch it over to a formal one. And then when they're looking for a new unit, to get a formal lease when they find a new place to stay.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that, or? Okay.
I mean, you have a legal relationship. When you have a month-to-month legal relationship, you have a legal relationship with the landlord, and state law will govern what it looks like. But the problem is that it can be they will set up when the notice is for when that can be terminated, and typically it might be just a month. So, or if state law is stronger, that's much better. Obviously, having a lease gives you much broader protections than is typically for a year or some period of time. So that's the advantage. And leases spell out some protections for the tenant in most cases. So those all have advantages. But state law does govern what people's, what the tenant rights are, including on month-to-month leases.
Thank you. For individuals who have filed bankruptcy within the last couple of years, and for those whose bankruptcy has not been discharged for more than 2 years, is there assistance available for those individuals? So for example, let's say they have steady and stable income. Will this make a difference, or would it still be best to refer them to private sources for rental purposes?
So I'll share that in our area that we also do a financial education workshop series that's 8 hours, that if someone has gone through or their credit score is not high enough to go into some of these other complexes, that sometimes they'll take that as a source of kind of non-traditional credit. And that's also why we work on like their rental resume to kind of show, if they have good past landlords and things showing that they, they always pay their rent on time. sometimes that can be used as the negotiation if credit is in the mix of getting into a complex.
I know here at Tabor, a lot of times we'll have folks that have run into similar situations. It's mostly credit related. And we're able to work with the landlord if they're looking to move into a property, to be able to, with the client, obviously, approval, sharing the budget. It sometimes goes a long way that they know that a third party has reviewed and they can sustain working there. And because we've been doing it as long as we have, a lot of times they're willing to give people a chance because they know that they're getting ongoing counseling through our services.
Yeah, we had the same type things. We worked with a number of people who didn't have very good credit. One, we work with their credit, obviously, but two, with our relocation assistance, sometimes what we have to do is get on the phone with the client and explain their situation. Now, we would love to be able to say, well, just instead of taking first and last month's rent, take 2 or 3 months rent. But unfortunately, for most states, that is something you can't do. That's against landlord right, tenant rights and landlord laws. But we found that the private places are a lot more lenient.
Someone asked if you can clarify, if the speakers could clarify, the call into potential landlord on behalf of their customers. Are counselors asking potential landlords to do this on behalf of their customers, or are you encouraging them to undertake this responsibility themselves?
So I'll share, we don't actually call landlords on behalf of clients, but what we'll do is we'll have a phone in the office and we'll have the client call while we are in the room with them. And they can, put on speaker if they want us to kind of talk about the services we've been providing. And, if it's any of our assistance programs to help with, security deposit or first month rent or something, that we can explain that a little bit more. But we don't actually do any of the contacting on behalf of the client.
Thanks. Ellie, this question is for you. If you want to speak to it, if you did a lot of work on this with partners and members, could you speak a bit about housing counseling certification extension? Some agencies have some concerns about it, given the August deadline.
Well, what I'll say is, and Bruce should chime in on this too, but we did submit a letter to HUD requesting an extension, and we await HUD's response.
I really think they're going to come through. When we had Brian Montgomery on weeks ago, he very clearly said they are completely aware that people can't take the test because and they can't take the in-person test because test sites have closed. They're aware that the most effective tool for training is the in-person test, in-person trainings, and those aren't permitted currently. We have continued to hear that this is all, I would just say, I think this is going to happen. I'm surprised it hasn't happened by yet, but I think the signals have all been pretty positive to having a substantial delay in the deadline on the certification.
Thank you. I don't know if Kim Johnson is still on the line, but I was just curious if she could speak on this briefly. ESG funds are required to have home inspections. Does this same requirement still exist for during the pandemic?
I'm still here. So I do believe that HUD has waived a lot of the requirements for home inspections in order to cut down on, having people enter other people's home unnecessarily, to maintain appropriate social distancing protocols. So I'm pretty sure HUD has waived those inspection requirements. And by I'm pretty sure, I mean, like they have.
Thank you. And Bruce, I just wanted to clarify that if they are not, that let's say, for instance, HUD does not come through and they are not HUD certified by August 1st, will they impact their funding for counseling?
Well, yeah, I mean, technically, if August 1 hits and you haven't passed the test, your counselors haven't passed the test, they're not allowed to counsel. And in effect, how do you then deliver services? So that's got to have an impact.
I'll just also chime in to say that you do have to have at least one certified counselor to maintain your agency approval by HUD.
And the FHA coordinator.
Those are all the questions.
Oh, good.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. We are going to do more work on rental counseling coming forward. We've gotten support from Wells Fargo to pay some special attention to this project of theirs, and they've been particularly interested in this field. We think that this has a lot of impact on the future of the work that we do. So please, if you've got other projects you think we should highlight, funding sources, we're very interested particularly in the availability of emergency funds for people who are renters. And I know there's a number of local funds out there. We'd love to know about those as well. So on well, actually, we're going to do quickly. Thanks so much for the groups that have been renewing and joining NHRC. I know that the groups are under a lot of strain right now. We really appreciate the support you can give and understand if it's not the right time. I'm really kind of thrilled how much groups have been stepping up and being willing to do this. This provides us the flexibility to do things that don't normally get funded, like lobbying. So it's a really critical piece of our budget. We still have a discount on credit reports, and it seems to be moving quite smoothly these days. The Savvy discount doesn't matter because it's free, and you just please use it whether you're a member or not, and you'll have a good sense of how it works. I think what I want to do is just take a minute and talk about what our call will be about next time. And Ellie, do you want to give a summary?
Sure. So next week we are bringing on statewide coalition members from several states to talk about the importance of statewide advocacy. And it's interesting because this is something Bruce and Melody and I have been talking about, trying to create a webinar on, and it has become suddenly much more important. So that's why we're really pushing forward to try to get this happening. And we're doing it next week. And we'll be hearing from groups about what kind of successful statewide advocacy they've done. What are some things that, some real basic tips and tools about what you can do in your state if you haven't already been starting it. What makes a successful advocacy program. And then we're also going to have a little bit stronger lens in our advocacy around the CARES Act funding that has been specifically created, and some of the things that Kim Johnson kind of gave us a broad outline on. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. And a couple of the organizations that are going to talk about their statewide advocacy have some pretty deep knowledge about CDBG and ESG type work, and can talk about what they've done and how they've been successful and what they know. So that is next week, same time. And we'll be getting out the registration within the next day or so. Well, hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow.
Cool. Okay. Thanks everybody for a good call, and we'll talk to you next week.